The digital clock on the dash read 9:15 p.m., a full quarter of an hour past the curfew Julian Vance had set for him. After paying the cab driver, Leo Sterling slung his backpack over his shoulder and broke into a brisk jog, a silent prayer echoing in his mind for a delayed flight, for an empty penthouse. He eased the heavy oak door open. The cavernous living space was shrouded in darkness. A slow breath of relief escaped his lips. Julian wasn't home yet. Leo flicked on a dim lamp, turning to drop his bag, and his heart seized. A figure was seated in one of the monolithic armchairs, cloaked in a silk robe. Julian Vance. A glass of amber liquid swirled in his hand. He lifted his gaze, his eyes as deep and still as a frozen lake. He told his puppy to kneel. The plush fibers of the Persian rug cushioned Leo's knees. Julian drained his glass in one deliberate motion, the crystal clinking softly as he set it down. He beckoned Leo closer. To mitigate the inevitable punishment, Leo bit his lip and crawled the remaining distance, rubbing his cheek against the man's thigh in a gesture of placating affection. Inside, a litany of curses against the cold-hearted deviant unspooled. Two elegant, strong fingers gripped his chin. Julian noted that his little dog had been disobedient, asking why he was late. The driver had reported that Leo had dismissed him. The deep voice was devoid of inflection, but the undercurrent of displeasure was unmistakable. Leo, his head bowed, explained that with finals looming, he needed to spend more time in the university library to maintain his GPA for the scholarship. Fabricating excuses for Julian had become a practiced art. A soft, humorless chuckle was Julian's only reply. His expression was unreadable. A large, cool hand began to trace the contours of Leo's face, a leisurely inspection that made the fine hairs on his skin stand on end. The hand paused at his cheek, fingers lightly flicking the lobe of his ear. He asked what this was. Damn it. In the rush of leaving the bar, distracted by Finn, he had forgotten to remove the stud. What kind of impoverished, innocent scholar wore a diamond stud? Julian had questioned the piercing before. Leo recalled the story he had spun. Something about a childhood illness and a quaint folk belief from his supposed backwater hometown about piercings warding off bad luck. A family tradition from when he was very young. He elaborated now that the stud was a gift from a classmate in his jewelry design program who had noticed the piercing. It was a gift, just not from a classmate. It had been a birthday present from Finn. Maintaining a facade of calm while lying to Julian's face required immense control. Leo looked directly into his eyes, widening his own to appear as guileless as possible. Julian's question about whether the friend was a man or a woman was deceptively casual. Leo knew that either answer would lead to trouble. His mind raced. He described a couple he'd met at the literary society, explaining that he often saved them a table at the library, and the earring was their way of saying thanks. He blinked, channeling all his performative innocence, hoping it would be enough. Julian let out a dry laugh, leaning in close, his voice a low murmur. He hadn't asked how they met, questioning why his puppy seemed so nervous. Julian's tone was always gentle, never overtly aggressive, but his eyes were like searchlights, leaving no corner of the soul unlit. The sheer force of his presence made Leo's throat constrict, and he swallowed hard. Julian's gaze followed the movement of his delicate Adam's apple, and his expression darkened. Julian had just returned from a 3-day business trip overseeing the newly completed Palisades terminal. Leo recognized the look in his eyes. To divert Julian's attention from any further interrogation that would surely unravel his lies, Leo acted. As Julian's index finger began to trace his lips with suggestive slowness, Leo extended his tongue and licked the tip of it. The darkness in Julian's eyes deepened, tinged with a dangerous new heat. Feigning ignorance, Leo nuzzled his hand like a cat, whispering how much he'd missed him. A quiet laugh rumbled from the man above him. Julian offered a second finger, playing with his mouth, a pleased note in his voice as he encouraged him to continue. Julian's hands were works of art, long-fingered and powerful. Leo captured his hand, peppering it with small, bird-like kisses, maintaining his role as the pure-hearted innocent who couldn't possibly understand such carnal implications. Julian's other hand came to rest on his neck, the grip light but full of. He looked down, his voice husky. His leg was aching. He told Leo to get on top. A childhood fever had left Julian with a slight limp in his right leg, a subtle imperfection that was otherwise unnoticeable. Leo ducked his head to hide a roll of his eyes. The games were getting more and more twisted. He wondered if the old man's age was finally catching up to him. When he looked up again, his face was a perfect mask of shy submission. He used the man's trousers to pull himself up, straddling his lap. Julian leaned back, spreading his arms wide, a king waiting to be served. A mischievous idea sparked in Leo's mind. With a blush staining his cheeks, he made his movements deliberately slow and tentative, his hands exploring everywhere except where they were wanted. Julian's eyes burned with impatience until, unable to bear it any longer, he grabbed Leo and pulled him down. The mahogany bed frame groaned for most of the night, threatening to splinter. The next morning, Leo's body felt like a collection of loose parts. His legs gave out as he tried to stand. It was then he noticed a new addition to his wrist, a gold bracelet set with brilliant blue sapphires, clearly worth a fortune. No one mastered the art of the slap, followed by a sweet reward better than Julian. An apology for the previous night's intensity. "Old fox," Leo muttered under his breath. A glance in the full-length mirror revealed the stud earring was gone. A quick look in the wastebasket confirmed its fate. A pang of regret hit him. The earring was from a niche designer he admired, custom-made by Finn with his initials engraved on the back. Any object on his person not provided by Julian Vance met the same end. He sighed. Julian's recent business trips had made him careless. When he went downstairs, Julian was already dressed for the day, finishing breakfast. The new terminal required his full attention. Servants, meticulously trained in the Vance family's long-standing traditions, were adjusting his tie and cufflinks. They retreated silently upon Leo's arrival. Julian kissed his lips, wishing his baby a good morning. Leo feigned shyness, pushing lightly against his chest. Julian studied him for a moment, then picked up a small box from the coffee table. He apologized for breaking the earring and offered this as a replacement. Inside was a pair of studs, their sapphires matching the bracelet. Clearly, this had been planned. A sliver of fear ran through him. Did he know? Why else give earrings to someone whose persona was that of a simple, poor student who would never wear such things? Leo forced a smile and politely declined, saying he wasn't used to wearing them anyway. Julian ignored his refusal, taking one out and gently fitting it into his ear. He remarked that there was a first time for everything, and that it was a shame to have a piercing and not use it. Julian Vance never allowed his gifts to be refused. He stepped back, admiring his work, and pinched Leo's adorned earlobe. He leaned in, his lips closing over the new stud, his tongue tracing its edge. He whispered his hope that all of Leo's firsts would be given by him. Leo's legs went weak again. He blushed on cue, silently cursing the old man's practiced, devastating charm. Julian picked up a portfolio. He mentioned that on his trip he had purchased an island and a yacht for Leo. After they got their marriage certificate abroad, they could take the yacht from Palisades Terminal to their island for a vacation. The scale of the generosity was staggering. Julian's possessiveness was monstrous, but so was his extravagance. It made all the performances worthwhile. As he was about to leave, Julian asked if he had classes that day, suggesting he come to the office. Julian, for all his cold authority, could be incredibly needy. Indebted, Leo considered. He told him he had classes in the morning and early afternoon, but was free after 2. Julian's mood seemed to lift. He would have the driver pick him up from campus at 2. After Julian's car disappeared down the drive, Leo left with his backpack, not for the university, but for the hospital. When his family's business had collapsed years ago, His father had suffered a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. The medical bills were an astronomical sum for someone left with nothing. It was why he had researched Julian Vance, studying his preferences, and concocted the persona of a docile, obedient white lotus flower to ensnare him. The plan had been frighteningly successful. Last night was a close call, but his quick thinking had saved him. In the back of the town car, the moment the house was out of sight, the smile on Julian Vance's face evaporated. He asked his driver, Lee, if he remembered if Leo had a morning class. Lee, who had served Julian for decades, glanced cautiously at his employer in the rearview mirror. He confirmed that it was Wednesday, and Mr. Sterling had no classes scheduled for the morning. A little liar. A low laugh escaped Julian's lips. Lee couldn't understand it. The boss knew Mr. Sterling was deceiving him, sneaking out, yet he played along as if ignorant. It was completely contrary to his nature. Lee voiced his confusion. Julian stared out at the passing city traffic. He stated that to know if a bird truly belongs to you, you don't tether it. You see if it flies away and chooses to return. Tying it down too tightly only leads to mutual destruction. He had his parents' disastrous example as a constant reminder. A look of relief softened Lee's features. He had been worried by the boss's escalating possessiveness, fearing a repeat of the previous generation's tragedy. But Julian continued, his tone shifting back to business. He asked when the neurological specialists from Germany were arriving. Lee informed him that after reviewing Leo's father's medical records, the team had devised a new surgical plan and would arrive in the city next week. The only issue was how to inform Leo, whose entire fabricated history was that of an orphan from the mountains. They couldn't just announce they'd hired a world-class team for him. Julian instructed Lee to have the hospital leak the news to Leo that a prestigious German team was in town for a symposium, and that they were consulting on difficult cases. Lee nodded, but one concern remained. He ventured that Leo had initially approached him for money to save his father. If his father was cured, would he still choose to stay? The Vance family's obsessive nature was hereditary. If Leo left, the boss would. As if sensing Lee's thoughts, Julian leaned back against the leather seat. He would let Leo perform, give him the illusion of choice. That was the only way Leo would select the answer Julian wanted. He had to choose to stay willingly. Otherwise, Julian wouldn't hesitate to lock him away for a lifetime. A complicated expression crossed Lee's face. He understood. The boss was waiting for Leo to confess on his own and choose him freely. It wasn't freedom, it was a different level of control. By casting himself as the unknowing victim, Julian was luring Leo into a cage of his own free will. Lee felt a pang of pity for the boy. Oblivious to any of this, Leo left the hospital and went to the bar. He found Finn, hair a mess, and dragged him out of bed. Finn attacked the takeout lunch Leo brought like a starving wolf. Leo stood to the side, lighting a cigarette. It had been a long time since he smoked, a habit reserved for moments of intense stress. He told Finn that Julian had given him an island and a yacht. Finn grinned, slinging an arm over his shoulder and asking when he could visit Leo. Leo shrugged him off, adding that Julian had also mentioned getting legally married abroad, and that he'd almost been exposed the night before. Finn's face crumpled. If Julian started investigating, he would find everything. He reminded Leo that this was a man who had exiled his own brother and locked up his mother. For playing him like this, they'd be thrown into the harbor. He lamented ever coming up with the harebrained scheme. It wasn't Finn's fault. The Sterling family's debt was massive, and in the entire city, no one was richer or more suitable than Julian Vance. Besides, Finn had helped him immeasurably, even selling his beloved collection of sports cars to pay off the loan sharks who had cornered Leo at the hospital. Without him, Leo would have been maimed. Finn suggested they sell the bar, pay off the last of the debt, and run away together. That way, Julian couldn't find them. Leo scoffed at the idea of running. He asked if Finn could really abandon his dream of turning the bar into a nationwide chain. And what about their families? The Vances and the Callaways, Finn's family were titans. It was only because of Finn's status as the second son of the Callaway Empire that Leo had been able to engineer so many chance encounters with Julian. If they fled, Julian would undoubtedly take his anger out on Finn's family.
Finn pouted.
He said he'd be thrilled if Julian caused trouble for his illegitimate older brother. Besides, the doctors were optimistic about Leo's father. They could take him abroad and find the best specialists. As for the bar, they could open a new one anywhere. Leo's hand, holding the cigarette, paused. He felt a flicker of indecision. Finn studied him, a playful look in his eyes. He teased that while Julian had a dark reputation and a limp, he also had the face of a movie star and a phenomenal body. After almost a year together, surely Leo, who liked men, couldn't be completely immune. Leo found himself defending him, snapping that Julian's leg wasn't crippled, just a slight limp you couldn't even see when he walked slowly. Finn's expression was one of knowing amusement. He clapped Leo on the shoulder, saying that whatever he decided, he had his back. Julian had never been seen with anyone before Leo. The lavish gifts and the talk of marriage meant he must be crazy about him. Leo took a long drag from his cigarette. It wasn't love. Julian loved the character he played, a person who didn't really exist. Finn asked what his plan was. Leo feigned nonchalance, saying he'd take it one day at a time. Maybe in a year Julian would get bored, and he could walk away with the money. And if he didn't, Leo cursed. Then he'd just have to keep playing the part, for the rest of his life if he had to. Finn gave him a thumbs up. He was one tough actor. At 2 o'clock, after his last supposed class, the Vance family driver was waiting at the campus gate. Halfway through the drive, Leo realized they weren't heading toward Julian's downtown office. He asked the driver where they were going, a spike of fear imagining a corporate kidnapping. The driver calmly informed him that Mrs. Vance wished to see him, Julian's mother. Finn had told him she hadn't been seen in public for years, with rumors swirling that Julian had banished his brother to Africa and confined his mother to secure his power. The car ventured further into the suburbs, climbing a winding road up a mountain to the city's most exclusive private sanatorium. The first thing Leo noticed about Julian's mother was her striking beauty, the source of Julian's own handsome features. Another young woman was in the room, saying a familiar goodbye to Mrs. Vance. As she passed Leo, she shot him a cold sneer. Unsure of the situation, Leo stood meekly with his head lowered. Mrs. Vance got straight to the point, handing him a check. She stated that Rosalind was the wife she had chosen for her son, that the check was for $5 million, and that he was to take it and leave the Vance family forever. The classic soap opera scene. A flicker of excitement went through Leo as he contemplated his performance. Should he be the weeping flower or the defiant lover? Before he could decide, the door opened. Julian had arrived. Leo viciously pinched his own thigh, and tears welled up instantly. With a voice thick with emotion, he cried out, "Honey!" Mrs. Vance looked like she had swallowed a fly. Julian, too, seemed momentarily surprised. Leo had never called him that outside of very specific, private moments. But the show had begun. He threw himself into Julian's arms, sobbing that he didn't want to leave him. He looked up, his crying act so genuine, and was annoyed to see Julian was suppressing a smile. Only when he met his gaze did Julian pat his head reassuringly and told his baby to wait outside. He had something to discuss with his mother. Leo obediently left, carefully closing the door behind him before pressing his ear against the wood. The soundproofing was excellent, but he could still make out fragmented phrases. Julian's voice, cold and menacing, warned his mother that if she ever displeased him again, she would be moved from the sanatorium to a psychiatric hospital. She shrieked back, calling him a cold-blooded monster, just like his father, and that his brother. Julian's tone was laced with contempt, retorting that a bastard of unknown parentage had no right to the Vance name. Leo's jaw dropped. Julian's brother wasn't a Vance? The The sound of shattering glass was followed by his mother's hysterical screams that she had given birth to him. The rest was muffled, something about Julian's leg. A chill went down Leo's spine. The rumors were true. Their relationship was toxic, and his mother was somehow involved in the injury that caused his limp. When Julian emerged, Leo was already waiting in the car downstairs, feigning complete ignorance. Julian got in, raised the partition, and gave him a light rap on the head, asking if he enjoyed eavesdropping. Busted. Leo sheepishly rubbed his head against Julian's thigh. Julian seemed to be in a foul mood, running a hand through Leo's hair. Leo finally worked up the courage to ask if his leg was related to his mother. Julian used his thumb and forefinger to tilt his chin up. He reminded him that he'd been calling him honey just a moment ago, asking why he had reverted. Forced to look up, Leo noticed a flash of sapphire on Julian's right earlobe. It was the other earring from the pair he'd been given. He was wearing the match. He asked when Julian had gotten his ear pierced. The skin around it was red and slightly swollen, clearly a fresh piercing. A surprising wave of anger washed over Leo. He remembered his own experience, a stupid teenage decision that had resulted in a week of painful, swollen infection. He couldn't understand why Julian would do such a thing. A delayed adolescent rebellion, 2 decades too late? Julian asked if he liked it that it was a matching set. Julian rarely wore jewelry, but the stud, combined with the silver-topped cane he carried and his deep-set eyes, gave him the air of an ancient, mysterious European aristocrat. Leo couldn't honestly say he disliked it, so he admitted it looked good. Julian smiled, leaning down to lightly lick Leo's earring. He then told Leo the story. After his father's death, his mother had moved her lover into the Vance estate. On Julian's 10th birthday, the man complained that Julian had been disrespectful. His mother beat him and threw him out of the house. Leo winced, knowing Julian's birthday was in the dead of winter, and the old family estate was high on a mountain. He couldn't imagine a 10-year-old child being cast out into the freezing cold. Julian recounted that he remembered only the biting cold. He stood outside all night. At dawn, knowing he had to get to school, he started walking down the mountain and accidentally stepped in an animal trap. Lee had been away visiting family and didn't find him until that evening. The external scars were long gone, but the nerves and bone had been permanently damaged. Leo's hand trembled, a mixture of anger and a deep, aching sympathy. He asked if it had hurt. Julian took his hand. He said it hadn't, and that he had paid them back in full. His so-called brother was his mother's child with her lover. When that boy came of age, his mother tried to install him as the Vance heir, citing Julian's disability. Julian had won. His mother had been in the sanatorium ever since, her lover was in prison, and his good brother was likely digging coal in some remote African mine. Leo said with fury that she didn't deserve to be called his mother. Julian's expression softened. He saw that his baby was hurting for him. He explained that his father had loved his mother to a pathological degree, and her affair was an act of rebellion against his suffocating possessiveness. The father had a vasectomy after Julian was born. When he found out his wife was pregnant again, he rushed home to confront her and died in a car crash on the way. The previous generation's sins were a tangled mess. But she had given birth to him. If she behaved, he didn't mind affording her some dignity. The world saw Julian as a ruthless man who had crushed his own family for power, but they knew nothing of his pain. Leo felt an overwhelming urge to comfort him. He wrapped his arms around Julian's neck and kissed him. Julian's eyes lit up. He asked if Leo would be like his mother, if he would one day tire of his possessiveness and leave him. Leo replied that he wouldn't. He liked it. He promised to stay by his side forever, as long as Julian's heart didn't change. He was a con artist, but he only cheated for money, never with feelings. A pleased laugh escaped Julian, and he deepened the kiss. For several days after the visit to the sanatorium, Julian used his bad mood as an excuse to be relentlessly comforted by Leo in bed, his games becoming more inventive and demanding. There was no time to visit the bar, but something between them had shifted. Before, Leo would often wake in the middle of the night to find Julian watching him sleep. Now, Julian slept soundly, his head buried in the crook of Leo's neck. And there was more good news. The hospital informed him that the visiting German neurological team had developed a new surgical plan for his father, with a high probability of him waking up. He decided to take the chance. The surgery was a success. The doctor said his father could wake up anytime within the next few weeks. When Finn heard the news, he insisted on a celebration at their bar, Midnight. He complained that in Leo's absence, the rival bar next door had shamelessly copied their dance troupe concept. He declared it was time for their famous duo, the Starfall Jet pairing as their fans called it, to return to the stage for the bar's semi-annual anniversary. Before Julian, Leo had danced at the bar to make money. Finn often joined him, and a small group of regulars had started shipping them as a couple. Midnight was in the University District, a popular spot for students to work part-time or just blow off steam. 6 months ago, Leo and Finn had bought the place when the previous owner moved abroad. Finn's plan for the anniversary was to go all out, with the two of them performing a hot dance number for their fans. Leo agreed, teasing Finn to practice so he wouldn't step on any customers. Their stage was a long, narrow platform built over the main bar, with patrons sitting on either side. Knowing Julian's history, Leo felt a growing sense of guilt with every new display of trust from him. The life they had built felt like a beautiful illusion, ready to shatter. That night, Julian was propped up in bed reading through documents. Leo tossed and turned beside him, finally poking at the firm muscles of his abdomen. He wondered if he'd still be in such good shape at Julian's age. Julian looked over, the sapphire stud gleaming in the lamplight. He suggested some more exercise if Leo wasn't tired. He leaned over and pressed a kiss to Leo's middle finger before reaching into the nightstand drawer. Leo quickly rolled over, pulling the covers over his head and loudly announcing he was going to sleep, pretending not to notice the way Julian's body had frozen. Earlier that day, he had accidentally seen what was in that drawer: a pair of men's wedding rings. The knowledge had unsettled him all day. He knew Julian's vengeful nature. If he discovered the truth, being cast out would be the kindest outcome. He was a liar. The person Julian loved wasn't real. He didn't deserve that ring. He buried his head like an ostrich, determined to feign ignorance for as long as possible. In the following weeks, he subtly avoided Julian, a dance Julian saw right through, his expression growing darker by the day. The night of the anniversary arrived. Julian had been called away on an emergency business trip to the next state over. It was the perfect excuse for Leo to stay out all night. After 8 p.m., he slipped out, scaling a section of the perimeter wall during a security shift change, completely unaware he was being followed. When Lee tailed him to the bar and saw the giant promotional poster outside, he knew disaster was imminent and immediately called Julian. The poster, Finn's ridiculous idea, was a parody of an old, cheesy romance novel cover with the title $1 Billion Baby, Spoiling My Sweetheart. It advertised the anniversary party, with the proprietor and proprietress offering a discount on all drinks. When Leo saw Finn dressed in a full French-made costume, he lost his composure. He had to ask who exactly was the proprietress. Finn, adjusting the padding in his bust, declared he was willing to do whatever it took to beat the competition. At 10 p.m., the party was in full swing. After getting his stage makeup done, Leo sat with Finn on a small second-floor balcony, watching the dancers warm up the roaring crowd below. Finn toasted to his new beginning, saying the past year had been too hard on him. Leo downed the drink. The joyful chaos of the bar was a temporary balm for his anxieties. Looking at Finn in that ridiculous outfit, he couldn't help but laugh, the gloom of the past few days lifting. For the first time in over a year, they drank freely and happily together. At 11 p.m., Leo took the stage, adorned with a pair of enormous black angel wings. The atmosphere in the bar exploded. Fueled by alcohol, he lost himself in the dance, a genuine smile on his face. When Julian Vance walked into the bar, this was the scene that greeted him. On the stage, a beautiful young man, his eyes covered by a black lace blindfold, his chin and red lips the only features visible below it. The massive wings made him look like a fallen angel, Lucifer in the flesh, mesmerizing the crowd. Then, in a corner, Julian spotted another familiar face and raised an eyebrow. After Leo's solo, Finn joined him on stage in his maid outfit, complete with cat ears and a tail. The crowd went wild. Egged on by their cheers, they performed a few close contact moves. Finn, a natural showman, made exaggeratedly seductive faces at Leo, who struggled to keep from laughing. Just as he was about to turn away to compose himself, he caught a glimpse through the lace of two familiar figures sitting in a dim corner. His blood ran cold. It was Julian, and with him, Finn's older half-brother, Kendrick. Finn, oblivious, continued to grind against him playfully. Leo hissed that his brother was here. The music was too loud. Leo grabbed Finn's chin, forcing him to look. The two men were sitting less than 10 feet away. Leo wanted to get off the stage immediately, but Finn panicked. He stumbled, pulling Leo down with him. As the crowd gasped, a pair of powerful arms caught Leo securely. Finn was snatched up by Kendrick like a misbehaving kitten. Leo kept his eyes squeezed shut, praying it was all a hallucination. He hoped, with the blindfold, that Julian might not have recognized him. He lowered his voice, thanking the kind gentleman and asking to be put down. A low, dangerous voice replied, "Leo Sterling, you try to play me one more time." It was over. He was well and truly dead. From the crowd, two girls squealed that this was so much better, that the chemistry was finally right. One of them timidly asked Julian if he was the proprietress from the poster. Julian glanced at the flyer in her hand, then looked at the petrified Leo in his arms. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He confirmed that he was. He then announced that the current discount was too stingy, and that for the rest of the night all drinks were on the house. The bar erupted in cheers. Before Leo could protest the catastrophic financial decision, Julian slung him over his shoulder and carried him out. Back at the penthouse, he was thrown onto the bed. He tried to remove the blindfold, but Julian seized his hands, swiftly untying his own necktie and binding Leo's wrists with it. He purred that naughty babies had to be punished. Leo asked if he knew. Julian's voice was dangerously soft. Knew what? That their first meeting was a setup? That his entire life story was a lie? Or that he was running a bar with Finn behind his back? The fight drained out of Leo. Julian knew everything. He would be thrown out, and with Julian's power, he would never be able to see him again. The thought brought a hot sting to his eyes, and tears began to soak the lace. Julian asked why he was crying when he hadn't even started yet. He ripped the blindfold off. The sudden light was blinding, and Leo instinctively tried to hide against Julian's chest. He whispered that he was sorry. Julian had every right to be furious. He resolved that if he was thrown out, he would camp on the doorstep every day. Julian said he knew about his apology, but he wanted to know why Leo never took any of the chances he was given to tell the truth. He punctuated the question with two sharp swats to Leo's rear, the sting bringing fresh tears to his eyes. The realization dawned on him. Julian had known for a long time. He asked when he had found out. Julian's answer floored him. He'd known before Leo had ever accidentally spilled a drink on him at that gala. He told Leo he had seen him long before that. Leo stared at him, incredulous. He had no memory of it. Julian asked if he remembered finding a three-legged white cat 5 years ago. Of course, he did. He'd named him Bruce and cared for him for 3 years until he passed away. Bruce had been a stray, a fierce little brawler who ruled the neighborhood despite his missing leg. A wild thought occurred to Leo and he gaped. He asked if Bruce was Julian transformed. Julian tapped him on the head, telling him to read fewer fantasy novels. Then Julian told him the real story. He was 27, 3 years into his tenure as head of the Vance Corporation. He had just wrested final control from his mother and exacted his revenge, but a part of him still felt a flicker of guilt. On the way to the airport, Lee was driving down a quiet side street when 2 motorcycles roared up behind them. As they passed, a clouder of stray cats darted into the road. The lead rider wiped out to avoid hitting them. The rider stood up, took off his helmet, and revealed himself to be a strikingly beautiful young man. He held up a hand to their car, then gently scooped up a terrified, 3-legged white cat from the middle of the road. As their car drove past, Julian overheard the other rider asking if he was sure about adopting such a fierce-looking animal. The young man had replied that he loved him for it, that a cat with 3 legs that fought that hard was amazing. He was praising the cat, but inside the car, Julian Vance had blushed. For years, he regretted not getting out of the car and asking for the young man's name. Then, at a party, he saw Finn and recognized him as the other rider. He was about to approach him when he overheard him and Leo plotting to seduce him. So, Julian decided to play along, waiting for the beautiful young man to walk right into his trap. Leo stared, dumbfounded. So it wasn't him who had ensnared Julian, but the other way around. Julian smirked, admitting Leo wasn't entirely wrong. But he added that his baby had been very naughty, dancing so scandalously in public with another man, even forming a CP. He wondered aloud how he should punish him. So that was it. He was angry about the dance, not the deception. Leo argued that Julian knew he and Finn were just friends. The sadness and fear evaporated, replaced with overwhelming relief. As long as Julian wasn't kicking him out, nothing else mattered. Julian caressed his cheek, his lips brushing against Leo's. He said of course he knew. Otherwise, Finn Calloway wouldn't still be in one piece. But, he added, he was still very, very displeased. He crushed their mouths together in a punishing kiss. As the kiss ended, Leo remembered Finn, who had been caught by his own overbearing brother. Kendrick Calloway was notoriously protective of the family's image. He voiced his concern that Finn would be dragged home and punished. Julian just pushed him back down onto the bed. He told him not to worry, that Kendrick was in love with Finn and would never truly hurt him. Leo's mind short-circuited. He stammered that they were brothers. Julian clarified that they weren't, not by blood. Kendrick was adopted. Finn was the product of his mother's affair. Leo's mouth hung open. The city's high society was a cesspool of secrets. No wonder Finn always spoke of his brother with such resentment, yet lately with a new, guilty edge. Julian's voice turned into a demonic purr. He told his baby to worry less about others and more about himself. Then he began to remove his clothes. The next morning, Leo woke to the heavy, comforting weight of Julian lying on top of him like a human blanket. The sun streamed into the room, a ray of light glinting off something on his hand. A ring. He looked down, then over at Julian's hand, which rested beside his own. A matching ring was on his finger. A slow, silly, incandescently happy smile spread across Leo's face.